All right, so let's continue with chapter 13 and talk about immunity. This unit, this part 2, we will cover non-specific immunity. So non-specific immunity is basically your body's ability to resist and fight infection. So immunity in general is your body's ability to resist infection and disease, but we have two forms: non-specific or innate immunity. This non-specific immunity is just that. It doesn't distinguish one type of pathogen from another. It just kind of destroys anything that's considered a pathogen. The response is the same regardless of the invading agent. And it's present at birth, so it's innate. And it provides a non-specific resistance to pathogens. And then specific or adaptive immunity we'll talk about in part 3 of chapter 13. And here's a list of non-specific defenses. You have 7 different types of non-specific defense. We're going to talk about some of them specifically, and some of them we'll kind of brush over. So the integumentary system provides a physical barrier. So anything that provides a physical barrier is going to protect you. And as well, including that physical, in that physical barrier, there's glands like sebaceous and sweat glands that can flush secretions off the surface of the skin or wash away microorganisms. And some of those secretions contain antibacterial products or destructive enzymes that can prevent infection. The hair as well prevents from mechanical abrasion. So it actually is a protective structure. And then epithelial covering. Any surface where you have epithelium is particularly multiple layers is going to be a protective surface. Remember, your integumentary system, one of the major tissues there is stratified squamous epithelium in the epidermis. That stratified squamous epithelium is multiple layers, upwards of 30 layers sometimes, of just stratified of squamous cells. So that can create an actual physical barrier. So physical barriers are one type of innate or non-specific immunity. It's just a protective layer. Again, the secretions there can contain enzymes or antibodies or even acid that can protect against, like sometimes bacteria don't work well in acidic environments. So they can, just like your stomach acid, there's epithelial tissue there, but there's also the production of stomach acid that can destroy pathogens before they get to the lower parts of the intestine and can cause problems or even get into the blood. Mucus in the respiratory tract that's secreted from mucus glands traps pathogens, and then you can basically cough that out. Urine flushes away passages in the urinary system. And then glandular secretions in the reproductive tract can flush the tract, but also protect like sperm and the oocyte, the eggs, as they move along those tracts. And then we talked about mucosal associated lymphoid tissue that's there as like a line of defense in certain tracts, like the digestive tract we talked about specifically, that provides non-specific defense. So there's a mucus cell that produces mucus, and there's mucus along the respiratory tract trapping pathogens. Phagocytes are able to phagocytose cells, so engulf or eat. They're a first line of cellular defense, and those phagocytes can remove cellular debris or respond to a foreign antigen. We talked about antigens previously, and can attack and remove microorganisms before lymphocytes like T cells and B cells can even detect their presence. So phagocytic cells are like the first line of defense against certain infections. Like remember, neutrophils we talked about are a type of white blood cell that is your first line of defense against bacterium, and they can engulf phagocytosa bacterium and then communicate with other white blood cells in the immune system to say, hey, we got to get rid of this infection. And there it is. So neutrophils, they phagocytose cellular debris and invading bacteria. So neutrophils are the most abundant type of white blood cell, and they are the first line of defense against invading bacteria. So they engulf, phagocytose bacteria, and then present that information about that invader to the other cells in the immune system. Eosinophils are much less abundant, but they can also phagocytose foreign compounds or pathogens, more so like parasites as opposed to bacteria like neutrophils. And then the monocytes are another type of white blood cell. They are agranular, so there's no granules in their cytoplasm, but they can convert themselves into a macrophage, which can phagocytose cells. And there's two different types of macrophages. Fixed, meaning they're stuck in some connective tissues, or free macrophages that can travel throughout the body. So here's neutrophils, big white blood cell with a multi-lobe nucleus and granules. An eosinophil, the granules stain like that reddish orange color. And then monocytes that differentiate into macrophages that can engulf. This is a macrophage engulfing a bacterium. So these phagocytes, they can squeeze between endothelial cells. It's called diapedesis. That is the process that they can basically use to move between cells. Or they can be attracted or even repelled by certain chemicals and surrounding fluids. So we've talked about chemotaxis before. That's basically what chemicals attract phagocytes like neutrophils to the site of infection. And they basically migrate through the blood and into the tissue because they're attracted to that chemical. And that chemical may be a signal from the tissue that it's damaged or infected. And basically how phagocytosis occurs is the phagocyte, neutrophil, eosinophil, or a monocyte, basically macrophage, binds to part of the surface of the target cell, and it's not supposed to be there. And phagocytosis occurs. And basically after the pathogen is phagocytosed, that cell, the phagocyte, actually destroys it. And basically some things inside the phagocyte itself can destroy the foreign pathogen. It's a really cool process we'll talk about here shortly. Inflammation is a localized response, and inflammation is a good thing. It's indicated by swelling, redness, heat, and pain. So everybody knows when something has been swollen and red, or if you have an infection, inflammation occurs. Inflammation is a good thing. I know it hurts and it's red and it's tender, but it's supposed to isolate the infection so it doesn't spread. And basically alters the chemical composition of the fluid in the tissue to isolate the damaged area. So inflammation is a really good thing. And it's protective. Fever is another type of innate immunity or non-specific defense. And fever is a good thing too, to a certain point. There's these little chemicals, proteins called pyrogens. Think of pyromaniac, loves fire, right? So pyrogens are what basically change our internal thermostat in our hypothalamus and increase body temperature above 37 or 38 degrees Celsius. And basically raising body temperature slows down and inhibits viruses and bacteria from reproducing. And that can also increase body metabolism, which helps you mobilize tissue defenses faster and accelerate the repair process. So raising body temperature is a good thing. You should let fever go, but monitor it until it becomes too high. And too high depends on the person. But like a fever of 101 or 102, that's degrees Fahrenheit, right? Can be okay. It can be a good thing. You're raising the body temperature to try to kill off viruses and bacteria. So it's your body's natural response. And it's a form of innate immunity. So here's an overview of these non-specific defenses. We talked about physical barriers, phagocytes, immune surveillance by natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are a type of lymphocyte that monitors peripheral tissue. They're responsible for immunological surveillance. We've talked about these natural killer cells before. Interferons are chemicals that are released by white blood cells that can stimulate activity in other white blood cells. Complement, we're not going to talk about much, but it's a simple a system that complements your immune system and helps destroy pathogens, and basically helps antibodies destroy pathogens. We'll talk about antibodies later. Inflammation we just talked about, and fever we talked about. So these are all the innate immune responses. This is a quick overview of innate or non-specific immunity. And then in part 3 of this chapter, we'll talk about specific immunity as opposed to non-specific. So I'll see you soon.